Thank you for having me. First, I want to give a little disclaimer. My subtitle here says an unexpected key to COVID survival, and I don't intend that to be flippant. I know many of us have lost loved ones in the pandemic, but in the context of my story, I'll be sharing a different type of survival. I have loved ones whose careers, marriages, and well being did not survive COVID. So it's in this context that I use the term COVID survival. So I was, Dick approached me asking, "What has servant leadership done for you? Can you tell us a story?" So that's what I'm going to do today. My first introduction to servant leadership was my first job out of college in a publishing company, working customer service in the 90s. So we're talking like headsets, those big computers, memorized zip codes and credit card prefixes. I was in a huge room of cubicles with one cubicle in the middle that was elevated above the rest to look over the partitions. That kind of environment. There was a door at the end of the big room, and that's the office where the boss was. So my first day on the job, the boss invited me into the office and explained to me that her job was to support me in my job, and she called it servant leadership. I thought that sounded pretty nice. But then I went to work, and I didn't see her again until over a year later when payroll made a mistake and gave me a double bonus, one added to my paycheck and one in a separate paycheck, or like a separate check. So she called me into the office to explain the mistake and to let me know that my next 3 months of paychecks would have little deductions until I paid back the extra bonus. Well, it didn't feel very good. Definitely did not seem like someone who was committed to supporting me in my job. Fast forward 15 years after I had the privilege of being a stay-at-home mom. This time I re-entered the workforce while simultaneously working on my master's. In a few months, I inherited a department that worked top down. The previous director was an expert at what she did, and she clearly directed the people in her department to perform specific tasks, reporting back to her on a regular basis. And I'm going to take a moment to back up and explain what department this is. It's the Department of Residence Life. So it's tasked with providing quality, caring residential community for students to support their academic goals and personal development. At that time, the department was made up of 38 RAs and 4 full-time RDs. And I was asked to just fill in as an interim director for a few months. So I walked into the room full of RDs, and I said, "My job is to support you in your job." And I heard my boss from the 90s, and I just felt like an imposter, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I drew on what I remembered feeling. I wanted a boss to ask me how I was doing, what excited me about my work, and where I felt disappointment. I knew I couldn't offer this specific task or this staff any specific expertise like my predecessor. So I relied on them to tell me what they needed. And so that's an interesting thing about being an interim anything. Your job pretty much is to just make sure things don't fall apart in the in-between, right? So I stepped into that role honestly just wanting to know what the staff needed to be successful. I listened, and I just tried to find a way to deliver. My desire to see them succeed motivated me because I cared about them. Before being named the interim director, I was the administrative assistant for the department. So I had connections and I understood the operational systems. And I observed how these RDs were very literally managed. And my empathy for their situation drove me to genuinely care for them as individuals. I wanted to see them succeed. So good for me, right? My heart was in the right place. Greenleaf says that a servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve. It begins with a natural feeling. My desire to serve was a good place to start, but I knew I wouldn't serve well if I couldn't figure out a way to lead well. By then, I was well into grad classes, but still didn't feel like I had an expert knowledge to take me to a place of confidence. All the same, since The department didn't fall apart. The RDs responded well to me, and complaints went from multiple complaints going to the president's office a day to 0. I was offered the full-time job. I accepted and prayed for guidance to find what I was missing. Up to that point, I had felt like I was just adding an empathetic human side to a well-designed collection of policies and structure. That resulted in a sense of kindness and less transactional and more relationally focused. So things were feeling better for my team and for the students, but I was starting to run out of things to soften or edit. My interim strategy was coming to an end. And it was about that time that I was invited to a servant leadership roundtable and officially introduced to the real concepts and theoretical framework of servant leadership. It was in these monthly meetings that my curiosity was sparked, my library expanded, and I had a roadmap to give me the confidence to serve while leading a talented group of young professionals. I restructured my weekly department meetings to spend the first 15 minutes on an aspect of servant leadership, forcing me to constantly learn and share. In my industry, in higher ed housing, the life cycle of a professional staff is ever evolving. Resident directors serve like 1 to 3 years and move on. It's the nature of a high demanding live-in entry-level professional job. It's one of those stepping stone positions that sets the groundwork for a variety of other higher ed roles. So, 5 years into my servant leadership journey of learning and sharing, I had a multi-generational, strong professional team of resident directors who applied these principles daily. I was not the expert managing specific details. I was part of a mutually supportive team that leaned on each other and learned from each other. We practiced good listening. We worked on cultivating foresight and challenged ourselves with growing awareness. Our structure allowed for continued growth in numbers. Now we had 60 RAs and 5 professional hall directors, and we did not lose that personal touch. But then COVID hit. And I know we each have our own COVID stories. On the home front, mine included navigating care for a high school exchange student we were hosting while his family in Spain suffered extenuating circumstances. I had 2 daughters away at school, one in California and one in Texas. And you remember what travel was like when the country shut down? Those cross-country road trips were challenging. And one of my daughters was in a car accident during her cross-country road trip, when businesses and service centers and insurance companies were not operating as normal. On top of that, I was the last elective surgery at my local hospital before they shut down. So I was recovering from knee surgery without PT, because after all, that was not considered essential. I was trying to be a mom and navigating the chaos on campus. Our college students were in the middle of spring break and told not to return except to remove their belongings. We had students stuck all over the country, people afraid, international students who couldn't get home, domestic students facing housing insecurity, and too many unknowns. But I had a staff of servant leaders who lived on campus and knew how to care well for each other and for me. They did not ask permission to create a solution for food needs for stranded international students. They just created solutions and told me what they would need for support to continue. They checked in on each other. They checked in on me. We took turns encouraging each other. We redistributed responsibilities, mapping out what made sense for the live-in people and what made sense for remote workers to take on. Observing the distress that some of our stranded students were experiencing, the RDs expanded well-being programs and all sorts of resources into the living spaces to reach those students. They did it in a way that was safe. Their ability to pivot according to need was possible because they had the freedom to serve well. Rather than waiting for an expert to give instruction, they served from a space of knowledge, and that's what servant leadership fosters. I can't imagine how I would have survived my marriage, our family. I can't imagine how our students would have been cared for if it were about me and my expert knowledge. When a resident explained she didn't have a home to go to and her on-campus job was suspended and she didn't know how to pay for food, The RD was empowered to fearlessly find solutions. And I say fearlessly because I know what it's like to be in a work environment where you second guess yourself and your decision-making ability, not knowing if you'll have support and resources to do your job well. My team was not paralyzed by self-preserving fear. They were motivated and freed to serve well. The COVID crisis helped me realize that there's freedom in the servant leadership model, and that freedom is incredibly valuable. My department would have crumbled, and the students would not have been cared for if top-down expert knowledge was required to accomplish anything during those first and most intense weeks of COVID. And the surprising gift to me was that the gift of freedom was returned to me. My team cared about my personal and family situations, and they reminded me that my recovery and my family needed to take priority. So I was blessed because I practiced servant leadership, and I hope that you have those experiences too.